So, Matt Cardona in Impact Wrestling. Of course, this past weekend at Impact Hard to Kill, Matt Cardona made his shocking debut with Impact Wrestling. The former Zack Ryder, of course, was released by WWE back in April of last year due to budget cuts associated with the current pandemic. He then moved to AEW, signed a very short-term deal, made a couple of appearances for them, but that contract expire. Now, after that, there was lots of discussion about what would be next for Matt Cardona. Well, this past weekend at Hard to Kill, he made his Impact debut in a segment, a match involving Super X Cup tournament winner Ace Austin. Now, as I mentioned, Matt Cardona made his shocking debut of Impact Wrestling over the weekend at Hard to Kill. The former WWE superstar was introduced by Impact Wrestling Executive Vice President Scott D'Amore as Ace Austin's surprise opponent after the Ace of Spades pleas to be added to the X Division Championship match at Hard to Kill were denied by D'Amore. Cardona quickly picked up a disqualification victory after interference by Madman Fulton in the matchup, but what everyone is talking about is what is the future for Matt Cardona. Has he signed with Impact Wrestling? Has he signed a long-term deal, a short-term deal? Has he signed anything? Was it just a one-off? Was it a cameo? What is going on when it comes to Matt Cardona and Impact Wrestling? But following the pay-per-view, Fightful Select, which is Fightful's Patreon service, be sure to check that out and subscribe to them. They have reported that Cardona has not signed a full-time contract with Impact Wrestling, but as expected, as we mentioned here on the show a couple of days ago, he is going to be working the company's current TV tapings. Now, Impact reportedly planned to tape a couple of months' worth of content from January 16 to January 18. If Impact will bring Cardona back for the future tapings, that remains to be seen. We'll have to wait and see for that one. Cardona's match at Hard to Kill was his first match in a professional wrestling ring since AEW All Out in 2020. Cardona had a 2-month stint with All Elite Wrestling over the summer, but he was only signed to an initial 5-date deal. Before that, Cardona, of course, had the most famous run of his career, a 13-year run career with WWE, known as Zack Ryder. He was released by the company in April of 2020. So that's interesting when it comes to the update of Zack Ryder, or Matt Cardona as it were, right now when it comes to Impact Wrestling. I know a lot of people have been discussing what's going on with Matt Cardona, what's going on. Is he going to be staying with the company? Has he signed short-term deal, long-term deal? As of right now, he hasn't signed anything. That's not really surprising. To be honest, when it comes to Impact, it's very rare when talent comes in the door that they openly straight away sign them to new deals. That does happen sometimes with the Good Brothers and some other people to much fanfare, but look at someone like even Deonna Purrazzo or Eric Young. When they came in around July or just before last year, they came in, they didn't have a full-time contract, they were working on a per-appearance deal or a handshake deal or something like that with Impact. They felt it out. They say they saw how it was going and what the plans were, what the creative was for them in Impact Wrestling, whether they enjoyed participating there or not. Once they found out that they did, then they moved on and signed full-time contracts with them. That's been the case with Eric Young and Deonna Purrazzo, and it could be the case for Matt Cardona right now for Impact. So the most important thing, I suppose, when it comes to Matt Cardona and his future with Impact Wrestling is that he is present at the current TV tapings that have been taking place over the course of the last few days. What does that mean? Well, of course, that means that Matt Cardona, of course, is going to be on Impact Wrestling television for at least the next, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks at the very, very least, which is obviously very important when it comes to the future of Matt Cardona in Impact. So certainly he's not going to go away anytime soon. I think the irony being is that when he signed the AEW contract, it was a 5-date deal. I think he probably did about 5 or 6 appearances for AEW over the summer last year, but now, by doing only a couple of dates for Impact Wrestling, he arguably is going to be making more appearances for Impact Wrestling than he did for AEW, which does lend the question, something else I do want to talk about in this video, is if Matt Cardona does stick around for at least the next couple of months, or if he does stick around for longer and does eventually sign an Impact Wrestling full-time contract, what guys could we see Matt Cardona face off against? So I've had a little think about it. And I thought, who else could Matt Cardona, or who else could we expect to see Matt Cardona face during his time with Impact Wrestling? So let's go through a few names I would like to see him face off against. The first name, of course, is Ace Austin. Now, this was the match at Hard to Kill at the weekend. I thought the match was really well done, really well done. I'm glad that they did it the way that they did it, in that they didn't give Matt Cardona a victory clean by pinning Ace Austin in the middle of the ring. I think both guys needed to be protected in that match. I think obviously Matt Cardona is not going to come and do this surprise appearance and lose, so that was never going to happen. I think there would have been temptation there for Ace Austin to put Matt Cardona over, and I don't think Ace Austin would have suffered, but this is still a guy that was in the main event of Slammiversary last year. He was also, just a week prior, he won the Super X Cup tournament at Genesis, so it doesn't make any sense for him to be doing jobs straight away, even to someone of the level of Matt Cardona and the recognition of Matt Cardona. So I'm glad they didn't do that. I think the DQ finish, even though that's not usually my favourite way to do these things. I think that probably was the best way to do it, and ultimately it means they're probably going to have future matches between them both going forward in Impact, and I'm very excited. That's why he's one of the opponents that we've listed here, because obviously it would be strange if they didn't revisit what happened at Hard to Kill between Ace Austin and Matt Cardona. So maybe at the next Impact Plus event, maybe on a future main event episode of Impact Wrestling, it looks like we're probably going to get Matt Cardona versus Ace Austin once more. Who wins that one? I think it depends, frankly, on if Matt Cardona sticks around. If Matt Cardona is full-time, long-term with Impact Wrestling, you would probably say have Matt Cardona go over. He's more ready for prime time right now. If not, if it is like it was in AEW and it's a short-term deal for Matt Cardona, then to me it makes the most sense for Ace Austin to defeat him. You elevate Ace Austin once more. You help transition him once again into the main event scene. He just won the Super X Cup tournament at Genesis. You want to continue that momentum. So I think that makes the most sense. It all depends on the future of Matt Cardona there. But if not Ace Austin, who else could Matt Cardona face during his time in Impact Wrestling, regardless of how long it is? One name, of course, is Brian Myers, because Brian Myers was a former tag team partner of Matt Cardona. It's the first name I think most people thought of once they saw Matt Cardona show up to Impact Wrestling at Hard to Kill on Saturday. Now, I've been saying about Brian Myers and Matt Cardona coming into Impact Wrestling before Brian Myers signed, before even Slammiversary last year. That was one of the names I said. I said Brian Myers and Matt Cardona should come to Impact Wrestling because I think that's the best environment for them to succeed, and I still do think that's the case. Now, obviously, coming out of Hard to Kill on Saturday, we saw the photos on social media of Brian Myers and Matt Cardona. They're in the Impact Zone taking pictures at Hard to Kill. We know their work as former WWE Tag Team Champions on multiple occasions, as the Edgeheads. We also know about their time currently. They host their own podcast, the Major Figure Wrestling Podcast, which is very, very successful too. So it would make sense for them to obviously play up that on camera, and I think they probably will. I don't know the situation right now when it comes to Matt Cardona was presented as a babyface. Brian Myers so far in Impact Wrestling has been presented as a heel. I do think if Matt Cardona has signed long-term, it does make sense to pair them up immediately and then split them off. Obviously, we're just losing a big tag team in Impact Wrestling in the North. Ethan Page hasn't re-signed with Impact Wrestling. He's not expected to. He's currently a free agent. Obviously, I think that bridge is burnt, frankly, when it comes to Impact Wrestling as well. He wasn't happy with how the Hard to Kill event match with the Karate Man and Ethan Page turned out, so he's not going to come back anytime soon, which means the North, of course, is split up. In that case, you need a big and more reputable tag team to come in and replace them. And I think Brian Myers and Matt Cardona are exactly that. They are very well known. Are they the level of performance of the North? Probably not. Only time will tell. You could argue, yes, they've been tag team champions in WWE, but were they ever given the opportunity to really succeed and have fantastic matches in WWE? Of course, the answer would be no. The answer would be no, in the sense that tag team wrestling isn't important. It doesn't matter in WWE. So I think it makes sense to have them paired up once more. But then ultimately, like is the case with most tag teams, the money is in the split sometimes when it comes to tag teams. And I think that is the case for Brian Myers and Matt Cardona. Yes, they've spent a lot of time as a tag team, but they could really do the split and do something really special when it comes to Impact Wrestling. They can do a long-term singles feud. They can do crazy matches. They can do the matches they've always dreamt of doing on a big stage. They can do that in Impact Wrestling. So I think Brian Myers has to be considered as a future opponent for Matt Cardona going forward in Impact Wrestling. Now, what about some other names? Another name that should be considered, of course, is Chris Bay. Now, if you didn't watch the X Division Triple Threat match at the weekend at Hard to Kill, it was just beyond spectacular. It really was spectacular. Some of the moments in that match, Chris Bay hitting the cutter out of the air in midair on Manic, and the Art of Finesse, double Art of Finesse on Manic and Rohit Raju was just incredible. It really was incredible. And Chris Bay, I mean, you could probably almost get bored of it, but I wax lyrical about him so often here on the channel because he's just that, he's just that good. He really is just that good. He, to me, is the future of Impact Wrestling alongside Ace Austin. I've mentioned it time and time again. I mentioned Ace Austin and Chris Bay as people to watch and look out for in 2021 because they're just that good. I think Chris Bay and Ace Austin is your future main event for the Impact World Championship. I really do. And again, this depends on how long Matt Cardona is going to be with Impact Wrestling. If it is going to be a short-term deal, if he isn't going to be there that long, it makes sense to utilize him in the best way possible in getting the other stars that are going to be sticking around often and the younger stars over. That makes the most sense of Matt Cardona's time in Impact Wrestling if it is going to be a short-term deal. And even if it's a long-term deal, frankly, having a long-term program against someone like Chris Bay would absolutely elevate Chris Bay. in the grand scheme of things, people might not consider Matt Cardona to be this big level superstar because of his WWE run, but ultimately, he is a big name. He's widely recognized. Everyone knows who Matt Cardona is from his time in WWE. Just sharing the ring with him, if you're a Chris Bay, elevates you to the next level. Picking up victories, going toe-to-toe, having great matches, which I think is what Matt Cardona wants to do. He wants to prove to people that he's more than the woo-woo-woo and the fist bumps and the sunglasses and all that kind of stuff. He wants to prove that he can have great matches because, let's face it, how often in WWE was he even given the opportunity to have great long-form matches? Very rarely, very, very rarely. So I think stepping in the ring with someone like Chris Bay is arguably the perfect opponent for Matt Cardona. It really would be the perfect opponent for him to evolve, to show people truly what he's capable inside of the ring, because I don't think he's been really given that opportunity before. And ultimately, as I mentioned, it does depend on the contract situation when it comes to Matt Cardona. How long is he going to be around? Who is he going to be facing off against? How long is he going to be sticking with Impact Wrestling? But if he is sticking around for a while, I think a long-term feud with someone like Chris Bay absolutely elevates Chris Bay. If it's going to be a short-term feud, even having a short-term program with Chris Bay, having Chris Bay get a few victories, puts Chris Bay back up to that level, then he can start challenging for world championships. Because I think Matt Cardona, in the world of Impact Wrestling, is a world championship level caliber athlete. So I think Chris Bay would be a perfect opponent for Matt Cardona in Impact Wrestling. Speaking of the titles though, another name that should be considered to face off against Matt Cardona, of course, would be Moose. Now Moose, I think arguably had the performance of his career at Hard to Kill. It really was just spectacular, wasn't it? I think there obviously was a lot of discussion from yours truly as well, saying that would the match suffer with having Alex Shelley out of the match and having Moose put in? And I still think technically it probably did, technically. But I think that's probably quite harsh because I think, as I mentioned, Moose absolutely gave the performance of his career. Some of the stuff he was doing in that match, the moonsaults, the C4 from the top rope, all of that was just incredible. And he really stepped up at the weekend. He looked like someone that is going to be a world champion. And Moose is going to be a world champion inevitably at some point. We've been conditioned to think that as fans ever since Bound for Glory, or even since Rebellion last year when he brought out the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. So he's on the road. He really is on the road. I guess the issue now is, where does Moose fit into all of this World Championship picture if you've got Kenny Omega and Rich Swann involved? Now we know after Hard to Kill, and it'll probably be shown tonight on Impact, that Moose did attack Rich Swann backstage after Hard to Kill. Obviously, we know coming out of Genesis, Rich Swann has promised Moose a future Impact World Championship opportunity for sparing Willie Mack in that I Quit match. So we know that's happening soon. But if Impact wants to continue to get Moose over, if they want to continue to prime him for that main event position, for that future World Championship run and that future World Championship match, then maybe a short-term program against Matt Cardona is absolutely ideal for Moose. If Matt Cardona is only going to be around for a couple of months, what do? You do the same thing that you did with EC3. EC3 was only around for a couple of months. What did you do? You fed him to Moose. You had him put Moose over, even though it wasn't in a traditional match. It was in a cinematic match. Nevertheless, it put Moose over. It elevated him to the next level. And it set him up for that future World Championship opportunity. And I think that's probably the same thing to do here when it comes to Matt Cardona. If Matt Cardona is going to be around for only 6 weeks or something like that, get a Impact Plus special events out of it, have Moose destroy him in that match, and then Matt Cardona can go off and continue doing what Matt Cardona is doing. I don't know if that will be the case when it comes to Matt Cardona's contract, but it feels like everyone else at some point, if they're a big name, has been fed to Moose with the sole purpose of getting Moose over, of getting Moose to that next level, of creating that big star in Moose, and it looks like it's working because that performance at the weekend at Hard to Kill was just spectacular. It really was. As I mentioned, it's probably the best performance I've seen from him inside of an Impact Wrestling ring. It was just that good. So I think Matt Cardona would serve as an excellent opponent for Moose in Impact Wrestling. And finally, speaking of the World Championship, what about Rich Swann versus Matt Cardona? Now, I mentioned when it comes to Matt Cardona, when we did a video the other day talking about his debut at Hard to Kill, I mentioned that to me, Impact was always the right place for Matt Cardona. It always was the right place for Matt Cardona. Why? Because in AEW, I never felt it was truly right for him. Yes, he obviously has a relationship with Cody Rhodes. Yes, he has a relationship with the Rhodes family, Brandy Rhodes as well, and he's good friends with them. But I always felt if Matt Cardona went to AEW, the best he could do was the TNT Championship. That's not to say that's a bad thing, but you feel like for all of the years he was in WWE and for all of the people saying he's capable of so much more, he can be a next level athlete, he can be a main event level superstar, all that kind of stuff. You felt like once he was released from the shackles of WWE, his main priority would be to prove to people in WWE, look, I can be a world champion. And I just felt with the bloated and crowded roster of AEW right now, that just wasn't possible for Matt Cardona. It just wasn't. There were too many people ahead of him. Not to say that they were better than him or they were bigger stars or whatever, but it just felt like there were too many people ahead of him in that spot, and it just felt very unlikely he would become a world champion in AEW, certainly not immediately. Now, on the flip side of things, that's why I said Impact was the perfect place for Matt Cardona, because I do think Matt Cardona right now can be a world champion in Impact Wrestling. I think if you had Matt Cardona defeat Rich Swann tonight, which it won't happen by the way, but tonight for the Impact World Championship, you wouldn't necessarily question it, because Matt Cardona being a champion of a company like Impact, a smaller company, makes sense. And that's why I always felt it was the best place for him, because Impact is the perfect place for Matt Cardona to prove that he can be a world champion, to prove that he can carry a company on his back. And I mentioned before when it comes to Impact that the biggest issue I think Impact has right now is that they don't have that top level babyface. They just don't have it. Rich Swann, I think, does a good job as a world champion. The jury is still out about whether he's truly world championship material. I think time will tell, and I don't think he's been given enough time yet. But Matt Cardona, I think, he screams being that top babyface in Impact. If they can tie him down to a long-term deal, 2-3 years, then they've got something really special on their hands, because Matt Cardona really can be that top babyface. He's recognizable, he's got the name recognition, he's got the look, obviously he's got the ability in the ring, the ability to cut a promo, and he's got a chip on his shoulder. He wants to prove people wrong. He wants to prove, look, people doubted me for the longest time in WWE. And I mentioned before, how often did we see those long-form matches with Zack Ryder? We really never have. When was the last time a Zack Ryder match went 20 minutes or 25 minutes in a singles match? We really haven't seen it that often. Even the matches in AEW were tag matches with Cody and was it 5-on-5 or something like that at All Out? We never really saw that big, long-form match. And I think that if he sticks around in Impact, he can have matches like that with Rich Swann, compete for the World Championship, and I have no doubt in my mind Matt Cardona can, and if he does stick around, will be a world champion in Impact. I think it's the right place for him right now, I really do. So I think Rich Swann, again, if he sticks around, would be a perfect opponent for Matt Cardona. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the update on Matt Cardona's Impact Wrestling status and the possible opponents for Cardona going forward? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, WWE, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved with the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really just help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.